A Supreme Court justice just told a sitting congresswoman to go back to your hood. What happened next didn't just silence a hearing room, it stunned the entire country. This isn't just a political spat, it's a national reckoning. Before we reveal Representative Crockett's powerful reply, now viewed over 50 million times. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe. We bring you the real, raw moments in politics that reveal the true character of America's leaders. The tension in the congressional hearing room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Every seat was taken. Reporters lined the back wall, cameras already rolling. The committee members sat on their elevated platform, eyes locked on the witness table. At that table sat Supreme Court Justice Amy Coney Barrett, on the surface, but clearly uneasy. Her black robe, pristine and formal, made her stand out. In a room full of tailored suits and political power, across from her sat Representative Jasmine Crockett, leaning slightly forward, her yellow blazer glowing under the harsh white lights. Microphone in hand, she had just wrapped up a series of sharp questions about recent Supreme Court rulings on voting rights. The kind of questions that do not let up, the kind that demand answers, not talking points. Justice Barrett leaned closer. To her microphone came out sharper than anyone expected. "Congresswoman Crockett," she said, her tone flat but cutting. "Perhaps you should go back to your hood, where these performative tactics might actually impress someone. This is the United States Congress, not a political rally." The room froze, a split second of silence, and then it happened, gasps audible, and instant. You could hear the air get sucked out of the room. Some members sat back in their chairs, mouths slightly open. Others looked down, unsure where to look. Even the reporters, trained to stay quiet, turned their heads as camera shutters clicked furiously. Flashes popped like fireworks at midnight. You could feel the collective disbelief rising in waves. No one could remember a moment like this. A sitting Supreme Court justice speaking so directly, so dismissively, to an elected member of Congress, especially one who had spent her time fighting for the very people the court's rulings had just affected. And then, in that silence came the unspoken truth. America had just witnessed something we had never seen before. Not in this way, not from that bench, and not in that room. What happened next would go far beyond politics. It would become one of the most unforgettable moments in American public life. "What?" Representative Jasmine Crockett said, next would turn this hearing into one of the most unforgettable moments in American politics. In less than 30 seconds, her response flipped the entire room. Reporters, members of Congress, even the justice herself, were left in silence. No shouting, no chaos. Just one voice speaking truth so clearly that it stunned the entire chamber. And within hours, the world outside that room reacted the same way. Social media exploded. News anchors paused mid-show. People across the country, regardless of party, were sharing the clip and saying the same thing. Did that really just happen? But Crockett's words did not come out of nowhere. They were not part of some scripted comeback. Her response came from a lifetime of experience, from growing up in a military family, from working her way through law school, from fighting in courtrooms long before she ever sat in Congress, and they carried a weight that only made sense if you understood who she is, to really understand the power of what happened. You need to know the full story. Who are these two women? How did their paths collide in a moment so raw, so powerful, that it made America stop and listen? If you believe truth still matters in politics, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now. This is a story worth hearing to the end. Amy Coney Barrett's rise to the Supreme Court did not happen by chance. It was the result of years of hard work, a deep belief in her legal philosophy, and a clear path through some of the most respected institutions in the country. She began her academic journey at Rhodes College, where she stood out for her sharp mind and quiet determination. From there, she went on to Notre Dame Law School. She did more than just attend. She graduated first in her class and later returned to teach there, building a reputation as a thoughtful and principled scholar. One of the most defining moments in her career came when she clerked for Justice Antonin Scalia. That experience shaped much of her thinking. Scalia was known for his belief in originalism, the idea that the Constitution should be interpreted based on its original meaning. Barrett took that to heart. She believed judges should not make law. Their job was to apply it as written, regardless of the outcome. That belief followed her throughout her career and helped build her standing in conservative legal circles. In 2017, she was appointed to the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals. Just 3 years later, in 2020, she was nominated and confirmed to the United States Supreme Court. At the time, she was the youngest justice on the bench. She was also the only one with school-aged children at home. Barrett and her husband Jesse have 7 children, including 2 adopted from Haiti. Her large family and Catholic faith became part of her public image. Supporters saw her as someone who represented traditional family values and religious conviction. Barrett often spoke about the importance of judicial independence. She warned against letting political pressure influence legal decisions. In her view, the court must remain neutral. Judges were not elected to solve policy problems. They were there to interpret the law. That meant focusing on the text of the Constitution and the statutes passed by Congress. Even when the results were unpopular or difficult to many, she represented a legal purist, someone who believed deeply in rules, structure, and restraint. But to her critics, that same approach often seemed too cold, too detached from the real-world impact of the court's decisions, especially when those decisions affected voting rights and civil liberties. And that is where her path would eventually cross with Representative Jasmine Crockett, to women, to visions of justice, headed toward a confrontation that no one saw. Jasmine Crockett did not grow up with privilege or connections. She grew up in a military family where discipline, service, and sacrifice were part of daily life. Her father served in the United States Army for 3 decades. That meant frequent relocations, new schools, and constant adjustments. But it also meant learning early what it meant to serve your country and stand up for something bigger than yourself. That foundation shaped her. After high school, she went on to attend Rhodes College, the same school Justice Barrett had once walked through. But Crockett's journey was different. She worked her way through school, balancing her studies with the pressure of doing it on her own. She then earned her law degree from the University of Houston Law Center, one of the top law schools in Texas. That was where she began to understand how law could be a tool to protect people who often got ignored. After graduation, she became a civil rights attorney in Dallas. Her focus was clear. She took on police brutality cases and voting rights lawsuits. She represented people who had been silenced, overlooked, or abused by the system. Her work was tough, emotional, and often dangerous, but she kept going. Every case she took on made her voice sharper, her stance firmer. As her reputation grew, so did her sense of responsibility. She ran for office in the Texas state legislature and won. There, she did not stay quiet. She challenged bills that she believed hurt minority communities. She defended access to the ballot box and called out injustice wherever she saw it. Her speeches made national headlines. Her fire was hard to ignore. When she was elected to Congress, she brought that same energy to Washington. Representing Texas's 30th district, she quickly became a voice for the progressive wing of her party. She did not soften her message. She leaned into it. Her questions during hearings were tough. Her interviews were bold. She did not waste words, and she did not back down. Jasmine Crockett became known not just for what she said, but for how she said it. Her tone was unapologetic. Her arguments were sharp. Her passion was real. She walked into every room prepared and proud of where she came from. And when she sat across from Justice Barrett at that hearing, she was ready not just with facts, but with the full weight of everything she had lived through. The pressure had been building for weeks. The Supreme Court had just issued another round of controversial 6-3 rulings. Most of them followed the same pattern: conservative majority, liberal dissent. But the one that sparked the most outrage was a decision that weakened a key section of the Voting Rights Act. It made it harder for federal courts to step in when states passed laws that restricted voting access, especially in Black and Latino communities. People were frustrated. Activists, lawmakers, even legal scholars. Many felt that the court was turning its back on decades of progress, and at the center of those decisions was Justice Amy Coney Barrett. She had joined the majority opinion and stood by the legal reasoning behind it. So when she agreed to testify before the House Judiciary Committee for a routine budget hearing, it was clear this was going to be anything but routine. The hearing room was packed. Rows of press lined the back wall, cameras already rolling. Reporters whispered to each other, waiting for any spark to light the room. Lawmakers were tense, flipping through notes and watching the clock. They all knew who was up next. Representative Jasmine Crockett had been given 5 minutes to question the justice. Just 5 minutes, but she planned to use every second. When her name was called, she adjusted her mic, pushed back her chair, and stood. She wore a bright yellow blazer that made her impossible to miss. It was not just a fashion choice, it was a statement. Crockett was calm but focused. She was not there to make noise. She was there to ask the questions that no one else had dared to ask. And as she leaned forward to speak, the room leaned in with her. Everyone knew something big was about to happen. They just did not know how big. Representative Jasmine Crockett started her questioning with a measured tone. She thanked Justice Barrett for appearing before the committee, then moved quickly into the heart of the matter. She brought up the court's recent decision in Johnson v. Pennsylvania Election Commission. In that ruling, the court made it harder for federal judges to block voting laws that disproportionately affect minority voters. Crockett looked directly at Barrett and asked, "Would you agree that this decision limits the ability of courts to protect voting rights when states create barriers for Black and Hispanic communities?" Barrett kept her expression neutral. She leaned toward her microphone and replied, "Congresswoman, as you know, I cannot comment on specific cases beyond what is written in the opinion. The decision speaks for itself." Crockett nodded, expecting that answer. She adjusted her papers and said, "I understand that, Justice Barrett, but in your confirmation hearing, you described the Voting Rights Act as a super statute and called it essential to democracy. Do you still believe that?" Barrett responded, "Yes, I do. The Voting Rights Act is landmark legislation, but our responsibility is to interpret its text as written and apply it consistently with precedent." Crockett's voice remained calm, but her questions started cutting deeper. The majority opinion in Johnson said that disparate impact is not enough to prove discrimination. Yet we know that impact is exactly what many Black voters are facing right now. Since your ruling, at least 7 states have passed new laws that make voting harder in minority neighborhoods. Does that concern you? Barrett sat still. She said, "Congresswoman, the court does not follow legislative responses in detail. It is Congress's role to shape policy. Our role is to determine what the law requires." Crockett did not back off. She asked, "Should justices consider how their decisions affect real people? Because to many Americans, this is not just a theory. It is their right to vote." Barrett's response came quickly. The court cannot make rulings based on desired outcomes that would compromise the rule of law. We must apply the Constitution and statutes even when some do not agree with the result. Then Crockett changed direction. She removed her glasses and looked directly at Barrett. "Before your confirmation, you published an article questioning whether Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act was even constitutional. But during your hearing, you said you had no bias. So I have to ask, how should communities like mine trust that you are judging these cases with a truly open mind?" For the first time, Barrett's posture shifted. Her tone grew cooler. "Congresswoman, I believe you are mischaracterizing my academic writing. I have never said the Voting Rights Act is unconstitutional. I have analyzed interpretations of its provisions, which is the role of any legal scholar." The tension in the room began to rise. Crockett picked up a large printed chart and held it up. It showed polling place closures across multiple states. Red dots marked closures in Black and Hispanic districts. Blue dots marked new polling places in white areas. She said, "This is what your decision allowed. These closures are not theory. They are happening. Do you think this matches the original purpose of the Voting Rights Act?" Barrett's jaw tightened. She took a breath. "Congresswoman, I cannot comment on matters that could come before the court if these laws are challenged. We may have to rule on them, so I must reserve judgment." By now, the room was locked in silence. Crockett pressed on. "So you are unwilling to acknowledge the consequences of your own decision?" Barrett replied, "I am following a long-standing practice of not commenting on future cases." Her voice was even, but her eyes gave away something else. Frustration. The legal clash had started polite. Now it was turning sharp, and both women knew this was no longer just about legal theory. This was about who gets to define justice in America. Don't came the moment that changed everything. Representative Crockett, still calm, asked a deeply personal question. She mentioned Justice Barrett's family, specifically the 2 Black children Barrett and her husband had adopted from Haiti. Crockett asked how she explained to them her role in decisions that made it harder for people who look like them to vote. The room went still. Some Republicans groaned in protest. One called it out of line. The chairman shifted in his seat, unsure whether to interrupt. Justice Barrett stared straight ahead, her jaw clenched. Her voice came out sharper than anyone had ever heard from a Supreme Court justice during a hearing. "Congresswoman Crockett," she said, "perhaps you should go back to your hood, where these performative tactics might actually impress someone. This is the United States Congress, not a political rally." A gasp rippled through the chamber, the kind of gasp that says, "Did she really just say that?" Cameras clicked, phones came up, flashes lit the room. The chairman pounded the gavel, calling for order, but it was too late. The damage was done. Representative Jasmine Crockett did not raise her voice. She did not lash out. She stood slowly, her yellow blazer bright against the muted tones of the hearing room. Her face was calm, her hands steady, but her eyes said everything. She looked directly at Justice Barrett and spoke in a voice that was clear, steady, and full of quiet power. "Justice Barrett," she began, "I grew up in a military family. My father served this country in the United States Army for 30 years. We lived on military bases across the nation. That was my hood. My mother taught in public schools, helping kids from all backgrounds believe they could become something more. That was my hood, too." The room was silent. No one moved. No one dared speak. "After that," Crockett continued, "my hood became the classrooms of Rhodes College, the same college you attended. Then the halls of the University of Houston Law Center. Then the courtrooms of Texas, where I defended people whose rights had been trampled. My hood has always been service. Justice." She paused, then reached down and picked up a worn copy of the U.S. Constitution that had been sitting on her desk. She held it high. "Now, my hood is this chamber," she said, "the House of Representatives, where I took the same oath you did to protect and defend this Constitution. This is not about performance. This is about accountability." Her voice stayed soft, but firm. "This document does not divide us by zip codes or accents. It begins with we the people. That includes all of us, from every community, every background, and yes, every hood." Camera shutters clicked again, but this time the moment belonged to her. "I am not here to impress anyone," she said. "I am here to represent the people who sent me. People who waited 5 hours to vote. People who watched polling places shut down. People who are told their voices do not matter." She walked out from behind her desk and stepped down to the floor, closer to Justice Barrett's table. "I invite you to visit my district," she said. "Come meet the people whose lives are shaped by the decisions you make. Walk their streets, hear their stories, see their reality." Barrett sat motionless. Her earlier words now felt smaller, drowned by something deeper, real. "Justice must not be blind to reality," Crockett said, "because justice that ignores real people is not justice at all." Then she turned, walked back to her seat, and sat down. The entire room stayed frozen. No one clapped yet, no one moved yet. Everyone just sat with what they had heard, and in that moment, the power in the room had shifted completely. The moment Jasmine Crockett finished speaking, there was a long, almost sacred silence in the hearing room. Then, without warning, applause erupted. Not just from Democratic members, but from some Republicans, too. Even a few spectators in the gallery stood up. The chairman looked stunned, but did not stop it. It was clear something important had just happened. Reporters rushed to send updates. Camera crews scrambled to replay the exchange. Within an hour, clips of Crockett's words were all over the internet. TikTok, X, YouTube, millions of views poured in. The hashtag #MyHoodIsAmerica started trending within minutes. People from every corner of the country posted their own stories. A teacher in Detroit wrote, "My hood is the classroom where I teach kids to dream." A veteran from Georgia said, "My hood is the battlefield where I fought for this flag." A pastor in Chicago shared, "My hood is the pulpit where I remind people that faith and justice go hand in hand." The clip made its way to every major news channel. CNN, MSNBC, even Fox News played it on loop. Legal analysts called it one of the most powerful moments in a congressional hearing in decades. Some said they had never seen a sitting Supreme Court justice put in check like that. Others said they had never seen a lawmaker speak with such calm force. What started as a routine hearing had become a national turning point, and Jasmine Crockett's words were still echoing far beyond the walls of Congress. 2 days after the hearing, something happened that no one expected. Justice Amy Coney Barrett released a public statement. It was short, direct, and unlike anything the legal world had seen from a sitting Supreme Court justice in years. She wrote, "My comment to Representative Crockett was inappropriate and beneath the dignity of the office I hold. While I disagreed with the tone of the questioning, my response did not reflect the respect owed to a member of Congress or to the community she represents. I sincerely apologize." Those words were bold. But what came next stunned everyone. Justice Barrett announced that she would accept Representative Crockett's invitation. She said she planned to visit Texas's 30th Congressional District in the coming weeks, she explained. Understanding the real-world context in which our decisions operate can only strengthen the court's ability to uphold constitutional principles for all Americans. That statement sent shockwaves through the legal community. Court watchers, law professors, and former judges all weighed in. Some said Barrett's move was a necessary step toward rebuilding public trust. Others worried it blurred the lines between the branches of government. But nearly all agreed on one thing: this was unprecedented. The last time a sitting Supreme Court justice apologized publicly for a comment during testimony, almost never. And agreeing to visit a member's district, especially after such a heated exchange, that had never happened. This was not just about regret, it was about recognition. Justice Barrett seemed to understand that her words had touched something deeper than politics, and now she was willing to listen. 3 weeks after the hearing, Justice Amy Coney Barrett arrived in Texas's 30th Congressional District. There were no cameras, no press conference, no fanfare, just a quiet, carefully planned visit away from headlines and politics. She met with local judges, election officials, community leaders, and everyday residents. The meetings were held behind closed doors, not to hide, but to listen without the pressure of spotlights. One woman, a church volunteer, shared how her elderly mother waited for hours to vote in the last election. A high school teacher talked about how fewer polling places meant his students' parents could not vote during lunch breaks. A local pastor explained how changes in voter ID rules confused people who had voted for decades without issue. Justice Barrett did not speak much. She asked questions, she took notes, she listened. One community organizer said afterward, she was not defensive. She really wanted to understand. We showed her what it is like when voting rights are restricted, not in theory, but in real life. By the time Barrett left, there were no grand promises, no dramatic headlines. But there was something more meaningful. A bridge, a beginning, a quiet moment of understanding between two Americas that rarely meet face to face. The weeks that followed were not just about headlines, they were about something deeper, taking root. Law schools across the country started reporting a sudden rise in applications. Many of them came from first-generation college students and young people of color. Some applicants even mentioned the Crockett-Barrett exchange in their personal statements. They said it made them believe that the law was not just for the elite. It was for them to dot community centers, and cities and towns began hosting constitutional literacy forums. People came together not to argue, but to learn. They brought pocket constitutions, invited local attorneys, and asked real questions about rights, voting, and justice. These were not political rallies, they were civic lessons, and they were packed. For once, cable news hosts and social media voices paused their usual noise. The conversation shifted. Not fully, not permanently, but for a moment. People were talking about respect, about how leaders speak to each other, about what it means to serve with dignity. In the months that followed, Supreme Court watchers noticed a change. Justice Barrett's tone during oral arguments began to shift slightly. Her questions leaned more toward real-life impact. She still held firm to her legal principles, but her focus expanded. It was not about abandoning her views, it was about including more voices in how she applied them. As for Representative Crockett, she stayed on message. In every interview, she reminded people, this was never about me. It is about democracy. It is about making sure every American is seen, heard, and counted. One moment in a hearing room did not solve every issue, but it reminded the country of something it too often forgets. The most powerful words are not shouted. They are spoken with purpose, backed by truth, and aimed at justice for all.